Hi everyone, and welcome to the second video in our series on CDR import and the XDR mediator. My name is Oleksandr Zaluhovskyi and I'm a project manager with PortaOne. If you missed my previous video on this topic, which was an overview of CDR imports and how the XDR mediator works, you can find the link in the description for this video. Today, meanwhile, I'm going to continue our XDR mediator discussion by describing a few real-life scenarios we have encountered with our PortaOne customers that demonstrate different flexible use cases for XDR mediator utility. The first case I would like to tell you about is a CDR importing project for a telco from the United States. If you watched the last video, you will recall a use case that involved the Sprint operator in the United States. This case involved voice, SMS and MMS services that were coming to PortaSwitch from the Sprint within a single source file. So from a custom transformation logic standpoint, there were no fancy changes needed. The main challenge here was an extremely huge load. After making a few tweaks, we've reached the point where the XDR mediator utility is capable of handling more than 600 XDRs per second. By the way, since then our QA department has conducted regular performance tests of the XDR mediator utility, and we continue to be confident in its capability in terms of this level of performance. Also, in this project, the telco system was running a second instance of our legacy CDR importer utility that was configured to processing messaging CDRs coming from audio codes. If you are curious about how that worked, you can see the implemented logic on your screen right now. Our second use case is a CDR import project in the Netherlands that I myself implemented 10 years ago. You might be saying, 10 years ago? Why is Alexander bringing up such an old case? Well, it's true that our legacy CDR importer utility was less powerful back then in terms of the range of its built-in features. But still, this case stands out because even with a more bare-bones tool, we managed to successfully launch a project that included the import of SMS CDRs, the import of Internet CDRs, and the import of voice roaming CDRs. One of the challenges back then was related to the version of PortaSwitch that the customer was running. Their PortaSwitch release was outdated even by the standards of the time, and it didn't have native support of SMS and Internet service types by the old CDR importer. Why this telco was running such an outdated version and how we helped them resolve this issue is outside of the context of this topic and deserves a whole video of its own, so I won't tell that story here. If you do want to hear that complex migration story and a few others like it, let me know in the comments and we'll put a video like that in our future lineup. For now though, I can tell you how we imported those unsupported services. Well, in the end, both the SMS and the Internet CDRs were imported using the voice type, but we created a special custom identifier to categorize the import with the correct service type. This identifier simplified future troubleshooting and invoicing for the staff of that telco. And yes, like I mentioned in my previous video, since the release of MR55, the XDR mediator utility supports services like SMS and Internet in addition to other services. But what if you have a case where the account in PortaBilling that this CDR should be imported under differs from the username or CLD in the raw CDR? Well, that is not an issue. We create accounts with a special prefix in the ID. In this case it was something like you see on your screen. Before the import, we programmed the legacy CDR importer utility to do a lookup in the database and fetch the required usernames that have the appropriate prefix. Now, you may know that Internet access CDRs are usually charged on the OCS side by the number of bytes either sent to the user or received by the user during a session, or sometimes it's a combination of the two. In this situation, while we were importing Internet CDRs as voice, the telco was charging such sessions in PortaBilling per megabyte. Don't ask why, this was 10 years ago and things were different. So, we had to deal with a situation in which an Internet CDR would come to the billing engine with a normal connect and disconnect time and duration that was represented by something like the value you see on your screen that would transform into 73.5 megabytes. And while that might be okay for an Internet CDR, if it's marked as a voice CDR, that 73.5 megabytes would actually be read as 73,547,776 seconds, which is approximately 20 hours. Because the billing engine has built-in protection from such cases, it would immediately mark what it is reading as a 20-hour voice call call, but which was actually a 73.5 megabytes internet session with an error like suspicious event time, it appears as coming from future, and as a result it would be a failed CDR import. The easiest fix for this would have been to change the charging model from megabytes to gigabytes, but the telco was not allowed to do that. So instead, we simply programmed the logic to check for long internet CDRs, and when one is found, to split it into CDRs with smaller durations, and so the issue was tackled. That wasn't our only challenge with this project. This telco also wanted to charge the actual voice CDRs according to the set roaming rates, but again, there was no such built-in feature by that time. So what shall we do? At the time, we thought, hey, it's not an issue. Let's use the PortaBilling rate pattern attribute, which I'll talk about in detail a bit later in this video. But as it turns out, it wasn't so simple. The telco had a list of roaming zones, so voice CDRs had to be charged depending on which zone the call originated from, as well as where it was sent to. Moreover, these zones and prices were changed almost on a weekly basis. So yes, definitely not so simple. So here is what we did. We agreed that the telco will place a text file with zone prefixes and prices on the server and would keep it up to date. On our side, PortaOne would program the CDR importer utility to make a lookup into that file and construct a proper PortaBilling rate pattern value that looked like this, as you see on your screen. Meanwhile, the billing engine would charge this imported CDR according to the appropriate rate that was being maintained by the telco staff. I know, this all sounds quite cumbersome and probably seems more like a crutch than a proper solution. However, keep in mind that this was implemented on an outdated PortaSwitch version that did not support these services, and we were still able to use the flexibility of the old CDR importer utility to create a working solution. So in the long run, we had a happy customer who achieved their goal right away instead of having to wait months or even years until they could reach a new version of PortaSwitch to access these capabilities built in. We managed to launch their project right here, right now. And that is what really matters. If you are interested in how all the logic we used looks, then you can check it out on your screen right now. That brings me to our third real-life use case: extending our XDR Mediator utility for one of our European MVNO customers so that it can import and properly process services in top 3 files supplied by an MNO based in Norway. This was a project that involved services like SMS and MMS, voice, bank ID through the SMS, and also mobile money XDRs, which are related to subscribers paying for goods and services using their phone, whether that is sending money to charities, paying for parking, paying for tickets, or things like that. All of these records were in top 3 mobile data, and the sources were related to both national and roaming traffic. This use case did not need any fancy logic. We simply used text file processing, which was the preference of the MNO. And that solved it. Our fourth real-life project involved another one of our European customers. For this one, it was setting up an XDR Mediator utility for processing voice and IPTV services. This XDR Mediator utility setup was part of a bigger project that, apart from CDR imports, implied a subscriber migration conducted by PortaOne. The first CDR import was pretty straightforward, with the exception that API was the only way to obtain data from an external system that was responsible for the management of accounts, authorizations, and voice charging. So here is what we did. We created a script that is launched on a periodic basis to download the CDRs for a specific period of time using the API of the external system. This script also adjusts the structure of the data that has been downloaded through the API from the format used by the third-party system into the format used by the PortaOne XDR Mediator utility. And that's basically it. The XDR Mediator then processes those files and imports them into PortaSwitch. By the way, this is actually quite a common practice for projects of this type. We often see cases where an external system provides only an API for downloading the CDRs, and we have to create a script that will retrieve them first. As for the second CDR import case, this provider also has an external system responsible for IPTV and smart set-top boxes that allows an end user to buy additional packages of movies. This system is the so-called TVOD, which stands for Transactional Video on Demand. When an end user purchases a movie package using TVOD, a report is passed to PortaBilling in the form of an XML file. And while a regular XML file is above 30 megabytes and where you would normally see up to 24 files in a given day, we had to make sure the system was prepared for periods of extreme traffic, with files reaching up to about 200 megabytes each. This type of traffic will occur whenever the provider launched a campaign like half price on all action movies. When this happens, 3 times the normal level of movie purchases might come in. In this case, we were interested in importing only charges, so we did not need to account for any rate-based calculations, which according to our PortaOne experience is also quite a common approach. So this was also successfully implemented using our XDR Mediator utility. And that brings us to our final scenario, which involved one of our customers in the United Kingdom. The interesting setup here was the need for a large usage of access codes within a single product in PortaSwitch. This was so that the provider could introduce quite a big variety of different tariff plans for SMS, voice and internet services. So we created quite a big list of mapping between unique codes from a raw CDR and access code on the PortaSwitch web interface with a unique tariff. For those of you familiar with Perl or any other programming language, the setup looked like this. Pretty much every line you see here represents a separate access code that had to be added to the product in PortaSwitch, each with a dedicated tariff assigned by an administrator. And that wraps up my roundup of unique usage examples for the XDR Mediator utility. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed these real-life stories. If you plan to launch a CDR import soon, there are lots of ways that PortaOne can help. Or we can even handle it on your behalf from start to finish. If that sounds interesting, reach out to us using the contact details in the video description and we can help you design a plan that works best for you. Meanwhile, stay tuned for my next video on this topic, in which I answer all of your frequently asked questions about the XDR Mediator utility.